So after a recent video showing FK and IK blending in, well, Blender, I got the question to do the same thing in Unreal with control rigs. So here we are, same character inside Unreal with control rigs. I have this IK control over here that does, well, IK things with a controller and a pull target. And then I have this float value here that I can interpolate between FK and IK. So if I set this back to being 0, I can then use these FK controls instead. And then I can blend between these in any way that I want. So the basic same principles apply, which if you haven't seen that video is we're going to use a separate set of bones that these FK controllers control and a separate set of bones for the IK controls. Then the actual deform bones will interpolate between those two sets of bones. That's what this node here does. This is the collection of everything that I've made to do this, reusable as a node, because obviously we need to do this on the other arm as well, and maybe on the legs if you care for that. So I'm not going to go through and recreate this step by step. I will walk you through it step by step, which hopefully will be good enough, but it's not that much work. As you can see, this is the entire setup for the FK and IK switching. We're going to do this with the other arm as well now. So let's compile so that everything goes back to the default position. And let's get started here. So you can see that for the arm, I have these FK bones and the IK bones as well. I'm just going to do the same thing with the other arm too. So we've got the arm for the right here. That's these 3 bones. And I just Ctrl-C and Ctrl-V to copy them, and I copy them one more time because we're going to again need an FK and an IK chain for this, and I'll call this arm IK 1 through 3. That's 1, 2, and 3, just so that they're easily identifiable, and then these ones will be the arm FK 1, 2, and 3. So that's 2, and that is then 3. Once we have that in place, I'm actually not going to do the legs for this character, because those are going to be IK only. So once we have all that in place, what we do is you select top to bottom, so arm IK 1, 2, and 3. And we pull those in, we get them as an array item, and I put that into my function that I have here for the IK bones. Then I do the same thing with the FK, so I drag them in, make sure that they are ordered 1, 2, and 3. And those go into the FK bones. Now, before we go in and make the controls and everything like that, I think it is worth going through the actual node here and the function that I made, so that you can like replicate that and have that ready to go as we go ahead and make all of these like control bones as well. So I'm going to double click on this and we'll make a function. If you don't know how to make a new function to begin with, you can come over here into my blueprint in your control rig. You can just make a new function right there. Give it a category, give it a name, all that kind of good stuff. So this is going to take in a fair amount of inputs, which is going to be FK bones, FK controls, the IK bones, the AND control for the IK and the IK pull, the blending between the two, and the deform bones that will actually be doing the deforming for your character. You can see right here what types all of those are. We need, of course, a execution context, and then all of the bone arrays are going to be of the type rig element key. You can't quite see the word key, but it will be rig element key. This one right over here. So all these arrays will be of that type. The AND control and IK pull also will be a rig element key, and then the blend will be a float. And for output, of course, we have an execution context as well, because after we finish all this, we return and we move on with the rest of our graph. So set all of this up initially so that we easily have ways to like reference these things as we go. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a IK2 bone. You might want to use like a fabric node here or IK3 bone or whatever, depending on what you're working with. For my example, I have 3 bones, and that's a little bit confusing, but if you have 3 bones in total, including the hand, you use IK2 bone, because it is doing the IK on 2 bones, and then the 3rd bone is just the hand, which is going to copy the rotation of your IK controller, but that's not technically part of the IK chain. This is relevant. The primary and secondary axis, this will depend on how you rotate your bones in wherever you set up your skeleton, something like Blender or Maya. If you have them set up pretty much like correctly without any weird rotation or roll to them, having your primary axis being Y-1 and your secondary axis being Z-1 should be good. If you have any other rotation to your bones, these might need to be tweaked until you find the right rotation. If at all possible, just making sure that you don't have any weird roll rotation to your bones and just being able to use these axes is the easiest option. If for any reason you can't do that, you're gonna need to like just play around with these values until you get it right, which kinda sucks, but that's why you need to have your bones oriented correctly. Then, for the pole vector node here, we get our IK pole, which is one of the inputs for the function. You can see I call it IK pole. That just gets you a quick reference. It's effectively the same thing as just pulling through like this right into there. This is just a little bit more organized, a little bit neater way of getting that value. Then for bone A, B, and C, we get our IK bones. So that's the copies of the bones that we just made at the beginning of the video. And then we just get the items at index 0, 1, and 2 corresponding to bone A, bone B, and bone C. So this is the IK bones. This is bone 1, this is bone 2, this is bone 3. So that would be bone 1 would be the shoulder-ish for me. Bone 2 would be the forearm, and then bone 3 would be the hand. Lastly, the end control is just end control. Again, we get all of that from our input parameters. And that sets up our IK bones. Now again, do pay in mind that these are not the actual bones of your character's skeleton. There's one way that you can easily identify them. The bones that have a white coloring inside of them in this hierarchy, those are the actual bones that your character was imported with. Everything that's just an outline is the copied over bones that we're going to be using purely for rigging purposes. And those are the bones, in this case, these three that we are working with. The actual bones that will be deforming the mesh are going to be, let's see, where are they? Arm deform 1 through 3, right over here. Anyway, after IK2 bone, we simply set up an FK chain, and this got disconnected for some reason. And there we just put in the FK controls, which again is an input in our function, into the controls, and the FK bones into the bones. Setting up an FK chain is remarkably super easy. This isn't even limited to being only 3 bones like our IK is here. This is just going to map an array of bones to an array of controls, and that's it. It's super easy, super convenient. So now we have both IK bones and FK bones that we can use to interpolate between. And that's what this for each loop is going to do. So finally we get the deform bones, which again are going to be these bones with the actual like white coloring in them. And we for each loop over them. And for each one, we're going to take the element and we're going to set its transform in global space. Then the transform we're going to get from a interpolate node, and we use our blend value, which again we get from right over here, to interpolate between them. We're going to do the A pin first. So if we come down here, we can see the way that we're getting the transform for the A pin is getting our FK bones, the things that are being controlled by this node over here, and getting the element at a certain index, and the index will come from our for each loop. So that way we get the corresponding FK bone to the deform bone that we're setting at the moment. And we just get the transform from whatever bone we are getting, and that is going to go into the A pin of our interpolate. And for the B pin, we pretty much do the same thing, but instead we use the IK bones. So we get IK bones, we get the specific bone at a specific index, we get its transform, and we put that into the interpolate node here. And then based on a 0 to 1 value, the actual bone transform of the deform bone in the world will be either at A or B or anywhere in between. And then, importantly, at the end of the for each loop, we add in the return node, which a function should come with by default. We just need to hook it up to the end of our for each loop on completed. And with that, you have your entire FK, IK switch node. So Now that we have those, we can go back in here and actually populate it. So we have our item arrays for FK and IK. I'll just pull those in case you've forgotten how to do that. Again, you click from 1 to 3, important order. If you do this the other way around, it's not going to work. You pull it in and you create an item array. Do make sure, again, item 0 is IK1, 1 is IK2, and 2 is IK3. These are the IK bones. These are going to go into our IK bones inputs for this function. Then we do the same thing with the FK bones. I accidentally messed something up there. Hold on a moment. This is... yep, okay, that's not broken, I don't think. So that's good. Then we pull in this as well. Create item array. I could have sworn I put this in, but maybe Control-Z back through that. So IK bones. These will be the FK bones. So we put in the FK bones. Now we need to put in, oh, that's the FK controls. Now we need to actually make the controls. And we're going to need to put in FK controls, IK controls, and then the deform bones as well. We'll put in the deform bones at the very end once everything else is entirely set up. So how are we going to make these FK controls? Well, that's remarkably easy. We just select everything for the FK bones, so arm FK. Probably should have called these arm_r.fk, to be honest with you, but we should be good to go now. And you just right click on those, make new, add controls for selected. That'll probably add them fairly large, so do pay attention to that. You select all of them down here. And then once all of those are selected, we can go into the shape and we can set that to being something like circle underscore thick or thin, depending on what you personally prefer. We can scale them down. Make sure that this is all done within the shape, not within the transform, because the transform will reset when we compile. The shape transform specifically will not. Just scale them down to roughly the size that you want them to be, and then we can rotate them around, in this case, 90 degrees in the X rotation, and that should align them with the actual bones. So that's our FK controls. So we can pull that in. Again, make sure that they're selected top to bottom, not bottom to top. And create item array. Again, it's important that these match, because this is going to match them in the exact order that they exist in the array. So make sure that they are 1, 2, and 3. And then we can put this into the FK controls. So now let's make those IK controls as well. We're going to make these one at a time. As you can see down here, I have the IK control and somewhere the IK pull as well. I don't know actually where that is. It's down there. So these two need to be separate from each other because they need to be moving independently from each other. So we find the IK bone, number 3. That'll be the one for the hand, so it'll create it on the wrist, and we just make a new control for selected. And these ones we're going to make again one at a time to prevent them parenting to each other, but we can just scale it down all the same until it's a decent size, and then go back up to arm IK2, so it will be on the elbow. We again right click, make new control. You can probably just use new control itself if you're only doing one at a time, and that will be this one. We'll name them properly because otherwise we're going to get like super confused about which is which. But first and foremost, let's move this elbow one back, because this is going to be the pull target, right? This is going to be what the elbow is going to be pointing toward. So let's right click that and set offset transform from current. That kind of bakes in the offset to where it is so that it doesn't reset when I compile. Now this will be arm R IK pull, and this will be the arm R IK control, and that's pretty much all that we need here. So we can just select this control and go into our end control and press this little use item selected button, and it will set it to that one. And then for the pull, the same thing with the IK pull, we can use that right there. Now the only thing we still need to do is give in our deform bones, because right now it's not mapping this to any actual deform bones, but that's as easy as just going into our arm, getting the 3 bones. Again, making sure that they're in the right order, 1, 2, and 3, in that order, and putting those into the deform bones. And then we can connect up this IK switching thing. And when we compile, by default, I think it should be using the IK. Yep, we use the IK. I set the blend for this thing to being 0, and now it uses the FK. And if I set this blend to being 0.5, it is influenced by both. So it's 50% influenced by the FK, and then also 50% influenced by the IK as well, which can lead to some weirdness. This is mostly meant to just blend between a pose that uses IK and a pose that uses FK. Not necessarily to use both at the same time to create a pose with, but it technically can do that. Now, the only thing left to do is to make this blend thing animatable, because right now it's just a value that we put in here, but that's not really like useful in the sequencer. So the way we do that is we fairly simply just right click, we create a new control, and we'll call that the left or the right arm, in this case, right arm IK. And if we select that control, we can change this from animation control to being an animation channel, which is essentially just a variable that we can animate in the sequencer. So the default will be a Euler transform, but we can just set this to being a float. And now we have an animatable float that we can just put in here by doing get float. So get control float is the one that we want to use. Again, you can just, as you have it selected, use this button and it populates it properly. You can set up a minimum and a maximum and a float value. We're just going to use the float value. And it's probably good to set up a minimum and a maximum here, actually. So the minimum will be 0. The maximum will be 1. And you can even set it to a default initial value of 1. So that it starts with IK or 0 if you want it to start with FK, of course. So we compile that. And now we have that mapped to this value as well. So if I go into here, into like my animation level, and I go into animation mode with that thing selected. So we have like this skeleton selected. That's the one that we've been working on. This is an old version of it. And I go into animation mode. We actually do need to like have a animation. So let's open one up real quick. I think it's this one that I've been working on. There we go. Again, this is the old skeleton that I've been using, so this is a lot more like completed, but it doesn't have the proper IK, FK blending. But now I will just put my sequencer back onto my main monitor here so that you can see. I have in the proper character, so that is, I think, this one. The top one, we have the left arm IK as a value that we can animate. So let's actually, I think it's this arm is the left arm IK, right? So at the moment that's set at about 0, but as I change this value, you can see that it moves to the IK and back. And this is entirely animatable. So if I set this to 1, and then let's actually move the FK like significantly somewhere else. And I go back to the left arm IK. I know that we just set up the right arm IK, but this will work for both. And about 30 seconds in, I set this back to 0. You can see that it does animate between these two states smoothly. So that's the basic idea of how I have my IK and FK blending set up now in Unreal as well. I needed to make a control rig for this guy in Unreal 2. Just because I'm going to use them for like cinematic stuff, and that's a pain to animate in Blender. It's better to just animate that in context in Engine. So I figured, you know what? I got the question of, hey, can you do this in Unreal 2? And the answer is yes. It works a little bit differently because we're not using like the stretch to constraint and that kind of stuff, because as far as I know, I'm not an expert in Unreal control rig by any means, but as far as I know, Unreal doesn't have that same constraint that just stretches the end of a bone to a given point. But also Unreal's like built-in IK stretching is a lot less iffy, and you can set that up in your 2-bone IK right here. If I just enable stretch, we get a maximum stretch ratio, which means that we can now, I can just show you here, stretch out this arm to about 2.5 times its original size. And it technically doesn't like squish it down, so it's not proper squash and stretch. But I do believe that Unreal has some nodes in control rig to drive stretch and squashing as well. So maybe implementing a little bit of that with it can also get all of that sorted out a little bit better for you. The other point is that in the Blender version, we had a tweak bone for every single bone in the arm, and we don't have that here because we don't have that stretching too. The whole setup that we had with like tweaking bones kind of falls apart a little bit, which is not ideal for IK. But the wonderful thing is with FK, if we just go into our right arm FK here, these things also kind of work as tweaking bones right away, these controls. My weight painting is not very conducive to that at the moment because it's fairly harsh on the elbow. But if you just need to like change the positioning of things just a little bit, these controls immediately also do work as tweaking bones. Only for the FK though, the IK doesn't have tweaking bones in this scenario. It might be possible to set up, you might need to just like play around a little bit with it, but the same basic principles of having a set of bones for IK and an FK and then interpolating between the two of them is entirely doable, and then you can add to that or change the basic setup that we have here as you see fit. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. And a huge thank you to my Cave Big Brain tier supporters, which care more for coding than impulse control: Earl, Monserville Erno, my Cave Students tier supporters, Paul Berry and Oiku, and my Cave Digger tier supporters, Mauricio Farias.